Welcome GRD131, and all I'm going to do in this video is go over the Nature's Bakery oatmeal crumble bar, I guess. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm going to go over the box for this that we talked about in the discussion. See if you saw the same things I saw, and hopefully I could guide you a little bit with the critiquing and with some of the design principles. People did pretty nice as far as pulling out the things they needed to, but I want to make sure I reinforce things that maybe you didn't see. And keep in mind, this box was just sitting on my kitchen table. I don't eat these things. They look like candy to me. They don't look like anything healthy. So I don't want to start eating stuff like this, but I guess they're good kind of in between meals or something like that. And they're actually in the health food section at the supermarket, and I've seen them there, and there's all different flavors, and the boxes change. So if it's a blueberry one, it has blue type. If it's something else, it has others. So there's all different colors. I'll have to take a picture of it when I go to the store of all these things, so you see what it looks like. And it is in the organic section. It's not with any other kind of snack kind of stuff. It's in the organic section. So it really stands out. The title, the name of it really stands out. But anyway, what I want to go over first is just kind of looking at the design principles and talking about this a little bit, because it is an interesting kind of box here. Now, what's a little confusing is we have the Robin Landa design principles of house, hierarchy, alignment, unity, and space, which is fine. We could start with that because that's easy enough. And then we'll go over the Ekbarf. And some of these will overlap. Some of them won't even be that noticeable. But if we talk about hierarchy, what's most important here? Well, one thing I want to point out is if you just look at the text, obviously this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. So that has the 1, 2, 3. But if you throw in the image, almost like a billboard, it's like another thing that's thrown in here to get your attention. So it does compete, but it's okay because it's very different. So obviously, in terms of hierarchy, this is very important, and this is very important, the image at the bottom of this oatmeal crumble bar. And matter of fact, if you squint your eyes, this is a really bold font, a really heavy font. The letters are really heavy. The counters, the little holes in the inside are very small. That gets a lot of emphasis by being so bold. Plus, it's big. They made it as wide. Each of the words are as wide as the other. It's like a big rectangle here, and it's almost a third of the box. So this is huge, based on its size, based on how heavy it is, and it's obviously in a red color against kind of an off-white background, and I'll say a beigey kind of background, although it's a little yellowish too. Now, I took a picture of it, so depending on the light, it might have gotten a little, I don't know if it's how accurate it is. It looks a little more yellower from the photograph. But anyway, this thing down here has a lot of contrast. It has a lot of texture. It has a lot of angles to it. It's on an angle. This thing here, there's something underneath. It's the only part that has dark colors in it. Everything else is fairly light. But this has kind of dark, deep dark reds and purples in it. It has lighter colors. It has some green going around it, which is kind of a contrasting color, the complement of red. So there's a lot of things going on with this thing. It's in the shape of like a pyramid kind of. So it's a triangle shape. And what does that triangle shape do? Well, it leads your eye up. Not only that, this strawberry leads your eye up. So there's kind of pointers in here, and that's where we talk about flow. So the pointers are really the flow kind of thing. I know there's alignment and flow, and it gets confusing, but before I get into flow, let me talk about alignment. We have, this is kind of centered, and it's kind of right and left justified. It makes a box, and it goes right to the edge. So this is kind of centered, even though it goes all the way across. This is centered, so it's centered for at least half the box. And down here, we kind of have left and right. We have this element here, and then in the kind of the negative space, we have the text here. So there's kind of a shape here, there's a shape here, and they kind of balance each other off on either side. So it's kind of left and right justified at the bottom, and everything else is centered. And in terms of unity, before I get into the flow, because there's a lot of flow things, but in terms of unity, this background color is picking up some of the colors in here, so it kind of makes it all work together. There's all warm colors. Even the red is a warm color. All these colors are warm except for maybe the green and this thing over here. But it's all kind of warm colors, so that's kind of unified. And the fact that this image has a lot of the colors in the background, it keeps it all in a warm sense, so it feels very warm altogether. So that's where it's kind of unified. Even some other unifying elements, and look for repeating elements, is this font's a little rough looking. There's a little kind of wavy lines on it, and this is rough. It's a very organic looking thing. Even this scripty font that's here, it's a very casual kind of font, kind of rougher looking. They even threw some, I guess, oats or something around here, so it kind of repeats some of this stuff. So you have a lot of these elements that are repeating. You have warm colors that are repeating. You have oats in here that are repeating these little specks on here. So again, repetition kind of helps with unity. Like when we look at repetition, we say, oh, well, here's red, here's red, here's red. They're repeating it, but what it does is it creates unity. So now you have kind of a color scheme where you have red and then you have beigey colors. And I'll use that term, the beigey colors, and they're in here. So everything is using the same colors, just like I described on that one painting when they're sharing all the colors. So there's no colors that are really out of that spectrum. So that helps unify it. Now, we talked about hierarchy, this and this. Now, I don't know which one comes first because it depends where your eye is looking first. If you're hungry, you might look at this. If you're looking for the brand, if you're like, oh, here's on my list, they said pick up Nature's Bakery raspberry crumble or something, and you might be looking for this. So this might stand out more. And guaranteed, if you go to the supermarket, this really stands out. But if you're hungry, you might be looking at this. And if you've never seen the brand before, you might look at this and say, wow, that looks good. And then your eye goes up and checks out the brand and tries to remember it. Oh, next time I come here, I'll remember Nature's Bakery, or I'll look it up or something. So we have that in terms of hierarchy. We have alignment. We talked about alignment. And notice how everything is right on the margins here. This thing lines up here, so there's a lot of lines that go right to the edge of the box. Even this information over here is right justified, meaning it aligns on the right. So it forms that margin going around. And it also kind of fills in this little nook that's created by this pyramid shape here. So it creates this little nook here, and it fills up that space, so it kind of balances off from right to left. And then we talk about space, how it fits into space. Well, this gets into a lot of things, but we have kind of the foreground space. And I mentioned in one of the comments that there's a shadow down here. And the fact that there's a shadow gives us kind of like a foundation. We know this is the bottom. We know this is kind of ground. Up here, it's like floating off in space, but this gives us some kind of ground here. It gives us, it's something solid. So it's sitting here on a surface. And that kind of anchors it at the bottom. So this is our anchor at the bottom, and then it kind of moves up. So that's where we kind of have balance. We have this kind of, just like nature, we have the ground at the bottom, and this is like sky up here. So we have ground and sky, and even these rays are like sunshine kind of things. Now, obviously, they're coming from the oatmeal bar, but they're kind of leading out here, making this seem like a sky somehow, where this is a, rainbow or something. So that it's, obviously working in both ways. It's leading your eye out, but it's also highlighting this thing because there's rays coming out from this wonderful oatmeal crumble here. So the space is very unique the way the space is working. So we have basically a foreground, background, and this is kind of sitting in a foreground and it's sitting on a surface here. Now let's talk about emphasis. Now what are they doing for emphasis? Now that was pretty easy. We already talked about this. This is very bold. This is very textured, a lot of high contrast, darker colors, lighter colors, strawberries going all around it. So there's a lot of emphasis there. And contrast. Contrast is being used to create the emphasis. And alignment we already talked about. We have justified alignment in a box at the top. We have a little arch here. We have left alignment of this image. We have right alignment of this text. And repetition we talked about, the red color. We have strawberries, we have oats, all these different kinds of things. We have little circular things here, this smiley face. I guess I don't know what that is. But I was thinking, well, maybe this is something in here, but I don't know what exactly that is. I guess it's the smiley face that looks like a U. But finally, flow. And flow's kind of interesting here because, like I said, your eye could kind of come in here. If you're looking at this thing, and this has a lot of high contrast, this thing is like a pointer. And also the whole shape is a pointer because the shape is like a triangle, like a pyramid, I think I mentioned. So your eye kind of comes in here and it leads you up to the title. And the most interesting part of this is how you get back around again. And it's actually this thing, this oatmeal crumble. The fact that if this was straight, it wouldn't really do that. But the fact that it's on a curve kind of helps lead your eye in a circular motion. You go up here and it kind of leads you around. It's like a little guide. And it's also the transition between the top and bottom because, this is definitely the top and it breaks it up. And this is more organic at the bottom. And this is like the transition. This kind of, fills in the space, but instead of being a separator, it's kind of like a uniter. You know how they say fences sometimes, they don't always separate. They kind of make better neighbors. Well, that's kind of what this is doing. Just like we'll use lines sometimes. Sometimes lines will separate, but sometimes lines will actually help unite things. And I think this is helping unite the top and bottom. It's working as a transition because of this very square shape and this very pyramid shape. Then we have this round shape, which is kind of moving your eye around. Everything else is very straight, very geometric, and this is very organic shaped in here, even for organic in terms of the oats and stuff going around it, very organic in terms of the font, where there's a lot of up and down, where this is very, straight, capital letters, they're all in their own little boxes. This is up and down and has a lot of movement, kind of like the movement inside of this. So that's even repetition here of this thing repeating that. So there's a lot of interesting things going on here. And I'm not saying this is the greatest layout I ever saw, but there's a lot of interesting things to pick out. And I think the most interesting thing is this oatmeal crumble line acting as creating flow, because it creates this circular kind of movement. It follows the rays kind of, because we have these like radial rays that kind of come from behind the oatmeal bar, and they kind of shoot out and lead your eye out, but then this kind of brings you back in again. It brings you over to the strawberry. Now, I'm not crazy about the font here. I don't know if they have to bring in a whole other serif, bold serif font. I think that could be simpler, or maybe mimic that a little bit. I'm not crazy about the font, but bringing in, here's one different font, here's a different font, and then bringing in a third different font, and then there's sans serif font. So I don't know if that's necessary, but you could always try a sans serif font or something if we're ever going to redesign this, but I doubt we will. But anyway, we have this circular motion that leads us back. So, wherever your eye is, if your eye's up here, you're going to read right to left, and then you're going to follow this going down, and it'll kind of take you down here, and then you're back to the strawberry, which leads you back up, and this pointy shape leads you back up again. So it creates a lot of flow. That's what I'm talking about with flow, with movement, that there's a lot of movement going on, that there's lines that are leading you around. This text line is leading you around. This strawberry and the shape of the oatmeal bar is leading you up. And this is kind of leading you across, and then this is leading you back down again. So there's a lot of movement going on here, and that's all flow. And that's good. You want a lot of movement, and you want it leading you to the right things. And in this, you want it keeping you in here. This isn't necessarily a billboard, but it kind of acts like a billboard. It's like a square billboard where, if you drove by, you'd be like, oh, look at that. Oh, it's Nature's Bakery Oatmeal Crumble. And you'd just remember these couple things. You wouldn't really remember any of this stuff over here, but it's kind of like a billboard, and we're going to look at billboards and talk about billboards. So this is an interesting layout that I think uses a lot of design principles pretty well. And finally, one of the ones that's not really in our list that I mention sometimes is balance. And again, what balance is here? Well, it's very top heavy with this big block of red type up here, and this balances it off down here, even with a shadow. So that anchors it. It puts it on the ground. That's what I mean by balance. It's like a physical thing. So there's gravity here, and it's sitting, because there's a shadow, it gives it some space, and it's not just floating. So that's kind of the balance in here. It creates balance on the bottom that balances off at the top. There's balance on the left and balance on the right. Now, they're not equal. It doesn't mean they have to be the same weight, but it balances off kind of the alignment. This is on the one side, this is on the other, and it's lighter. So, they don't always have to be the same. It just means that there's something here taking up that space. And I think you'll recognize unbalanced more than you'll realize there's balance. And that'll be something that you'll just, gradually pick up as we go. But the big thing to point out here in balance, like I mentioned, is the gravity here, that you have ground, sky. Think of it in that way. You have foreground, background. These rays are in the background, and this is floating in the sky. So that's kind of what you're seeing there. So there's a lot of interesting things going on here, and we're going to look at packaging and flyers and all kinds of things, and also when we start doing logo design as well. But I just wanted to go over this in more detail just to see if you're seeing the things I'm seeing, just to start to see some of those things and start to match up the design principles with what you're seeing. So hopefully that helps a little bit.